She did the actual poll. Freehand.
Good evening. I'd like to call our meeting to order, and we'll start with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. I'll have the clerk please call the roll.
Supervisor Fountain?
Here.
Treasurer Horning?
Here.
Clerk Chofew? Here. Trustee Collier?
Here.
Trustee Germain?
Here.
Trustee Harper?
Present.
Trustee Petrucci?
Present.
Thank you. Item number 4 is approval of our meeting agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Kalani, second by Treasurer Horning. Is there any discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Call to the public. Anybody call to the public this evening? Being none, we'll move on to item number 6 is approval of our consent agenda.
Move. Support.
Motion by Trustee Petrucci, second by Trustee Harper. Is there any discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item number 7, we have some special guests this evening. We have Senator Joe Hune, State Representative Lana Theis, and State Rep Dr. Hank Valpella. Good evening. If you'd like to come up and join us, and I'm going to turn this over to Manager Wickman. We have invited our representatives from the state of Michigan here this evening to talk about a couple different things. One that we're going to start with is called the dark store theory. And I'm going to let James briefly explain it, and we'll. By the way, thanks for coming tonight.
Of course.
We don't think we've ever had at one time 3 of our state reps and senator here. So thank you for taking your precious time to hear our side of some issues that we're currently dealing with.
Well, I think the first, I'm sorry to interrupt already, but the first Hartland Township Board meeting I came to, there were a lot more in the audience than what are here today. And that was back in 01, 02-ish, somewhere around there. So congratulations. Yeah, I was 16.
This is the first time I've been to a Hartland board meeting. There hasn't been a larger audience, and the has always been for something favorable. You're always doing some good thing. Usually when you go to a township meeting and there's an audience,
That's right.
Yes. But this is the first time I haven't been here and seen an audience that was here for good reasons, for good work.
Well, thank you. So with that, I'll turn it over to James, and you can start with the dark store theory.
I was trying to keep this going.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Supervisor, and you said to briefly summarize it, and I don't know that I can. It is a complex issue, and certainly not something that we'll really be able to get in great depth on this evening. But I think from the board's perspective, there were some concerns about what's happening with this kind of train of thought the tribunal has tax tribunal has taken a rabbit trail on in a way that treats the big box stores, or even the medium box stores, or even for that matter unique buildings much more favorably than other small businesses, and really uses methodologies for valuation that defy professional standards. And so they're trying to make a correction of this issue through the tribunal process, and there's a big case that we talked about a meeting ago with the city of Escanaba and Menards, and this board, as well as many municipalities across the state, are contributing funds to the city of Escanaba to fight that legal battle. And the concern that many township cities and villages across the state, and this board also expresses, could there be a better solution legislatively? And so we appreciate you coming, and that's what we've briefed the board on before, is that there was a bill that passed the House in the previous session and went to Senate Finance Committee and didn't get out of committee there. There is a new bill, and I won't take away any more than that, but maybe if you could briefly help us understand where this issue is at, and if there is a reason that we can't get a legislative solution to this rather than the fickleness of the courts.
Certainly I can start, and I suspect my colleagues on either side of me will blame the Senate, but it's really accurate. I think the Senate, we have a strong and rich tradition of having autonomy of our committee chairs in the Senate. In the bill, there is a House bill, if I'm not mistaken, and a Senate bill that have both been introduced in each chamber. I believe it's the same sponsor in the House as it was last term, Representative Matern, if I'm not mistaken. He's from Kalamazoo area. I don't know exactly. Senator Casperson is from the Upper Peninsula, which apparently is one of the most impacted areas, or at least he has argued that's one of the most impacted areas with this policy. The bill is sitting in Senate Finance Committee. I've spoken with our chair, a good friend of mine, Senator Brandenburg, who's adamantly opposed to moving the issue. To be frank, I don't see the issue moving between now and the end of the year. My leader, Senate Majority Leader Arlen Meekhoff, has a similar sentiment. His office told me last week that the bill, they don't anticipate the bill moving this year yet. All of us are term limited, so that may give you some additional hope that the bill moves next term. But again, I just want to throw all the cards out there and be perfectly blatant. And I know you and I have talked about this issue. I don't know if it was last year or earlier this past year, earlier this year. I understand your sentiment, but I don't anticipate the bill moving. And I think your comment to me earlier was that the House didn't anticipate moving it because the Senate seemed to be the sticking point. And that's probably a reasonable legislative maneuver to defer to the House, to the chamber, where it doesn't appear to move quickly. And I can defer to, have my colleagues respond if they so choose.
I'll take a shot at it. There was a bill reintroduced in the House this year, and or last year actually, it was in March of 17, was referred to Tax Policy Committee, and I would concur with Senator Hune. It probably will not move there. The bill that was reintroduced this time is a lot more complex, it seems like, than the one that was last time. It really was specific in what the tribunal had to consider and had to actually have the figures for and look at. And I don't think the House leadership really looked favorably on it and thought it was going to move. And I don't think that it probably will move. And to complicate matters, the sponsor of the bill, the main sponsor, by trade, he's an appraiser, and so he is familiar with some of the things, and he may have gotten way too deep in the weeds with the bill, I don't know, but he was defeated in his primary election, so he will not be back in the House. And I don't see this bill moving this year.
I guess what I've got to add is not a lot of hope, but maybe some more information. The people who are watching this probably have no idea what it is that we're talking about. And so I'm going to summarize, and please correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while since I was sitting in the treasurer's seat. Effectively what's happening is, and when I was dealing with it, it was primarily big box stores. So the big box stores with the big names that you walk in and they're very large size buildings were being treated as if they were empty. They called it dark store, and so legislation to react to it was dark store legislation. Whether or not they were empty, they were being treated as if they were and being taxed as if they were. And so I think where our sticking point might be is that the legislature, much of the legislature is unfamiliar with the process, believes that this could be a tax, that this would be a tax increase on those stores. The reality is they would end up paying more, but what they would end up paying is what's fair by comparison to what everybody else is having to pay. And what happens with respect to that is everybody else has to pick up the weight that these big box stores aren't carrying. And so it results in our residents and the smaller businesses in the area ending up having to pay a heavier share of what the overall cost is. But I don't think it's being communicated that way. I advocated for it strongly, the changes strongly in caucus, and I believe that you were also supportive of the bill when it came last session. But I don't know how we get past this point from where we're at right now.
Well, I'd like to thank you for that clarification. I think that's important for our audiences. We're, you know, obviously we're online, so our constituents can hear what this is all about and why this is important. It's troubling to me because these same very stores, if they had to go to a bank and get a mortgage or financing, they would be producing an appraisal that would tell the bank how much their property was worth so that they could get the level of credit that they would be seeking. And it's just, the irony of this is in terms of how on the one hand, how the government assesses property versus how they want to be treated in the business world. And obviously, in most cases, they want to show the bank how much more value is in their structure and building in order to get their loan versus what they want to do in pay taxes. This is the age-old example of you know, businesses trying to find a way to not have to pay the taxes and push those taxes on and burden really on to the rest of the other taxpayers in the area. And I think why we wanted you here tonight was it garnered a lot of debate and discussion among the board. Is it seems the tax tribunal is really not the place to be correcting these issues, but really at the legislative. And I'm glad that you're all three of you are in the state legislature and have been looking at this. But this is something I'm struck by the fact that the chamber is taking the position they perhaps are, because at the end of the day, don't they represent all the other businesses? And those other businesses are really picking up the slack. So they're choosing one set of group of that's part of our economy over other businesses in the economy. And it really is kind of I think it's silly. I mean, they should be paying their fair share just like any other business in our community. So that's my take on it.
And if I can just piggyback on that, as we talked before, maybe to give a little more reference for the audience, is, you know, these big box cases, they're trying to make arguments for valuation at, you know, $25 a square foot. I think most people would understand the silliness of that idea, not only to a homeowner, but even to other small businesses. And it really gives them, there's a lot of discussion about the benefits and negatives of big box stores and smaller businesses. They have their advantages of economies of scale and everything else, but should they have this advantage because they can afford the attorneys and other things to make these absurd arguments? And the issue that you're speaking to is that, and maybe you can help us understand, what's the political issue? Because it's not really pro homeowner, it's not pro small business owner, it's really only for this group that the Michigan Chamber of Commerce has lobbied against, you know, the reform that we're suggesting needed. But that really doesn't speak to our local chamber, our smaller businesses having equity and fairness in the taxing system. And the bill that passed the House passed with wide bipartisan support too, and yet it gets stuck in Senate. What politically, what's really the other side of the argument? Because we're having a hard time understanding why your speaker, why your Senate Finance Chair would say it's a non-starter.
A couple of things. I'm not sure it's political. I believe from my conversations with Chairman Brandenburg, and this was a while back, and with his office again today, it's a philosophical view that he has that this is essentially a tax increase, and maybe the arguments of fairness and what have you haven't been laid out completely to Chairman Brandenburg. But I think that's the bulk of it, and he's certainly the sticking point in terms of moving a bill forward. And my leader has expressed opposition to it, and I don't know if he's dug into the details significantly as well. But again, and the institution of the Senate is different in that there is a rich, and I mentioned it earlier, a very strong tradition of deferring to the committee chairs. I chair agriculture and insurance, and you get those issues. Well, I ultimately have a strong say, almost the ultimate say, whether a bill gets voted on in my committees or not. And Senator Brandenburg is a dear friend, and if you've ever met him, he may remind you of the Marlboro Man. And nothing, he's a solid legislator, and once he's made up his mind, it's difficult to change that.
I think we probably did a pretty good overview of the issue. Any other thoughts? Maybe we can close this out and give you the last word on this.
This may be an indication of term limits, that we have term limits in effect. Maybe the issue would have been resolved prior to term limits, but if you want the issue resolved now, you might be thankful for term limits. Senator Brandenburg will be gone, I'll be gone, Senator Meekhoff will be gone. So like I said, maybe that gives you a little bit of hope that the issue gets resolved, and I don't mean to sound snide, but that's the reality of it. And I pass the mic to...
I would agree with Senator Hume that some of this, a big share of it, is philosophical as opposed to political. The argument that the owners of the stores say is that they have a unique situation, that their stores are really nothing. They have no other value than, say, as a big warehouse, and that to try to assess them otherwise is wrong, because they don't have a real sale value unless they can find somebody that wants to use them for like use. And some people buy that, some people don't. It just so happens that the people that have the say of whether the bill is going to be heard do believe that, apparently, because that's why it's not moving. And as I say, I don't think that it will move in the House. And now I think maybe the advocate, the main advocate, the sponsor, may not be as enthused. Won't be back next year anyway.
I think there was one other issue we thought we'd maybe touch on, since we have your attendance with us. But before we do that, anything else that you could share from Lansing, a legislative update for our residents, or?
Do you want to start, or do you want?
You guys can start.
Okay. Thank you for that. And this is my final year in the legislature. And as Representative Tice said earlier, it seemed like I was elected at 16, but it wasn't too far off. And kudos to you folks. I mentioned it earlier that I think it was my first Hartland Township meeting, and the place was packed, and it wasn't for a peaceful time. So you've done a remarkable job in what you folks have done in bringing peace and harmony and good governance to Hartland Township. So on behalf of all of our folks, thank you. But you've all become friends over the years too, and I thank you for that. Certainly it took a bit of effort and a little bit of risk to put your faith in a 22-year-old serving your interests in the state legislature, and I appreciate that. It's been a great tenure. I've enjoyed it. It's been, and I don't mean to sound cliche, but it's truly an honor. When I go into the state Senate, into the chambers, it's the most beautiful building, and if you haven't been into the Capitol, let us know. We'll get you on the Senate floor or the House floor, and we'll show you what we know of the building, and we're so blessed to serve our people. And it really does give me goosebumps every time I go into that Senate chamber to see how government in action, number one, but I'm thankful that the people have trusted me with representing them. We represent close to 300,000 people in the Senate, and it's been an honor. Certainly there are things that are difficult with the job. You got to get a thick skin, as you folks well know. It's just on a bigger scale. It's probably, oftentimes, you can get away from the dissension, because it's not always in your neighborhood, or as a township official, that 6 square mile or 36 square mile 6x6 area, it's difficult when there are contentious issues. We all get to go home and get away from each other, and you guys all live next to each other within close proximity. But again, it's been an honor. I grew up in the public eye. Hopefully I've done well. Hopefully I've served the citizens right. I believe I have. I'm sure there's somebody who claims I haven't, but such is life. So thank you. We've worked on a whole plethora of issues, and auto insurance is something that's becoming more and more of a problem that we're seeing out in our communities in terms of affordability. My colleagues on both sides of me have been phenomenal at helping to address those issues. And we just, before we broke for summer recess, passed a bill out of the state Senate to allow folks who are on Medicare to opt out of a significant portion of their auto insurance to ultimately save them hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. It's an issue we could go on and on about, but that's one of the most significant economic issues that we are trying to address in Lansing. There's so much money involved that people lose sight of what we're there to do is to serve the people, and from my perspective, it's to make sure they got more money in their wallets. That's a huge part of why I think I was elected, to serve our people. And it's amazing, and I don't mean to filibuster, it wasn't that long ago where we were flooded constantly with folks trying to find employment in government services. But now we see just the opposite. We're flooded literally everywhere we go with businesses, governments, schools looking for employees. It's a nice change in the economics of a decade ago, but we're seeing significant challenges with that. So with that, again, thank you for your confidence, your friendship. It's good to see you, and I'll pass the mic over to whoever wants to go next.
Well, I would concur with Senator Hune that he has done a great job. Good. Yeah.
Thank you.
You did say that, didn't you? Yes, I would concur with Senator Hune, and I thank Senator Hune for his service as well as all of you. I remarked earlier that every time I've been here, you've had a fairly large crowd, and it's always been for something very good. A decision had to be made, but it was always for good things that are happening in Hartland Township, and so I applaud all of you. Having been on a township board, it is a more personal thing, and you can't hide very well. You know, you can't go home and not have it. So I applaud you all on that. On my end of things, I chair the Health Policy Committee in the House, and the cost of health care is it's tied in with the auto insurance also as it goes up. That's what I deal with, and there's a lot of money there resisting any type of change that would be for a consumer. It's all change seems to be for the providers, and it's gotten to the point that it's so brutally expensive, and the insurances are kind of a pass-through. It sticks with them. I mean, they make their profit that way, but the cost of health care is so brutally expensive. I just looked at a bill from somebody I know that had been in the hospital 2 days, had some surgery. The surgery wasn't that bad. The hospital stay was $23,000 for 2 days. That's not chump change, and it's getting more all the time. So that's what I deal with, and we do have some legislation to try to look at transparency in drugs, try to do a few of those things, and it is a tough go, but I can tell you I have been impressed with the legislature that everybody tries. Everybody is trying. We don't all agree all the time, and that's why it's hard to get things done, which is probably a good thing that we don't move too fast, but we try, and on so many fronts: insurance, health care, tax policy. There's always something going on, and as as far as I can tell, all the people that we work with in the legislature are trying to do the right thing. It doesn't seem like it when they don't agree, but they are. And so we do try for you. And thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Yes, this year we passed or last year, but this session we did pass an opioid bill that the object of it and what it would accomplish would be to eliminate some of the opioids that are out there that have been legitimately ethically prescribed, but just over-prescribed. And I usually start when I give a talk on that on 5 figures, and I'll 5 numbers, and I'll go through them: 175, 25, 80, 20, and 575. And the 175 is the number of people in this country that die from overdose every day in this country. It surpassed auto accidents. It surpassed even illness on some of the deaths, the specific illnesses. The 25 is every 25 minutes a baby is born addicted to a addict that is, and that baby has to go through a withdrawal before they can leave the hospital. The 80% is the percentage of opioids out there that people get started on that have been legitimately and ethically prescribed. Maybe overprescribed, but they've been legitimately prescribed. The 20 is the number of years that this has been going on, and I hate to trash the medical profession, but on this, I think they have some culpability. They've said, we'll take care of it. Don't do anything, we'll take care of it. The 575 is the percentage increase in that 20 years of the problem. So many of the bills that we passed this year were to try to dry up at least that 80%, to try to address stopping young people from getting started. So there is a lot of work to do there, but and a lot of the legislation is being clarified, but we're trying to do that because the opioid issue is a major problem. And fortunately, our congressman is working on some of the shipping issues that we have through the mail and all with that. So there is a concentrated effort to do something, and it does look like that at least things are slowing down a little bit, but still those figures, that 175, that 25, those are unacceptable. And so we are working and trying on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative and Senator, and I would also concur with your own assessment of your your abilities.
Very much.
Sorry. What Representative Vaupel didn't say is he co-chaired a committee and traveled around the state to hear information about the opioid crisis and our mental health crisis in Michigan. And they came to some very good conclusions, some very helpful conclusions, but he's been working diligently to address those issues. My primary focus has been auto no-fault reform. We are one of only 12 states that still has it. It was originally put in place in order to keep our auto accidents out of the courts. 42% of our court system is wrapped up in auto-related issues. So it was 17% when we started, so it is an abject failure under that that standard. We are among the highest, if not the highest, depending on what you look at, in the country for auto insurance. And that's something that is terribly wrong and desperately needs to be changed. I spent a couple hours on the phone with a mom who has twins who just turned 18, who, because they're 18 and have licenses, had to go on her auto policy. She didn't buy a new car for them, but the $4,000 additional a year that she's going to have to pay to cover them, she's a single mom, means she has to get another job and spend more time away from her younger kids. This will be her 3rd job, in order to try to keep herself legal when she goes to her jobs. That is unconscionable and unacceptable and desperately needs to be changed. When we're out meeting with the folks, especially in this season. It is the primary thing that I hear at the doors. People are very, very interested in having it changed, so that will continue to be a primary focus. I want to thank you for inviting me. I don't currently represent you. I hope to, and we'll continue that fight. But thank you for the opportunity to come and speak before you and for giving us the information about where you stand. It's very hard to represent people that don't communicate with you about where they're at on issues, so it's helpful to have the reach out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if we could have maybe 10 more minutes, and James wanted to talk about one other item, and just to get your thoughts on.
Before we go on, may I ask one question about
Sure.
auto insurance? What is the reason, I hear that Wayne County has some of the highest auto insurance. Why are they higher than the rest of the state?
Do you want me to take that?
One word, risk, and then I'll turn it over to Representative Day.
So what insurance is that this part is true, is assessing risk. So when you're looking at an individual, you want to know what your likelihood is of whether or not you'll have to pay and how much you'll have to pay. And in other areas, particularly in Wayne County, there are a lot of other risks that don't happen elsewhere. For example, there are many more people in a vehicle on average than would be in Brighton. The average dollar amount of personal injury protection claims in Wayne County is significantly higher than the rest of the state by orders of magnitude. And in Michigan, our personal injury protection claims are significantly higher than anywhere in the rest of the country by orders of magnitude because of all of the fraud related to the system. So it's not just those issues, but those issues, when you add our law to it, are exponentially more difficult and more expensive for the insurers.
And do you have any idea what percentage of Wayne County residents actually carry automobile insurance?
There's a lot of guesses. I'd be surprised if it's a lot higher than 60% that have it.
During all this discussion, the Mayor Duggan taught me a new word that I was never aware of called driving dirty. And I said, what on earth is that? And he said, it's driving without auto insurance. And then we went through the economics of it. And he testified in the Senate Insurance Committee on a different bill, but the ultimate goal was to lower auto insurance. And I don't know the exact numbers, but somewhere around $5,000 was the average auto insurance policy in the city of Detroit. So not only is it an economic issue, but it really is a social issue as well. And I don't recall the exact numbers, but it was under $30,000 was the median household income. So if you have 2 members of the household working that want to drive an automobile, you're talking $10,000 just to be legal. It's crazy.
So we were talking about Mayor Duggan. As local government officials, you will understand this. One of his major issues is that people are choosing to go outside of Detroit and to claim that they live with their parents or aunts or uncles, for example, in order to attempt to get some insurance that's affordable. Well, when they do that, they're registered to vote in those other houses. The census recognizes them as living in another house. So imagine if a significant portion, say 30% of your township, claimed to live someplace else but was still utilizing all of your services, not paying your taxes, and you weren't able to receive any government grants for having the population level that you do. A significant portion of the population that lives there claims not to, and yet those services still need to be provided. So it is a very significant issue beyond just the income of the individuals that live there.
Thank you.
Thank you. James?
Thank you. Of course, on such an auspicious occasion, I think we'd be remiss not to talk a little bit about the state of municipal financing.
Time to go.
And of course, it's the thing that we've talked the most about over the years. And there are two main revenue streams that local governments rely upon. Of course, property taxes and the state shared revenue. And there's kind of getting hit from multiple angles on this issue because of the way the property tax structure is in Michigan, that when the value is depressed in the recession, they plummet, but when they come back out, it's a very slow crawl, and because it's capped by this inflationary factor. And I've just got a couple of slides to summarize these two issues. that the Citizens Research Council did. One is these 17 counties, and Livingston County is one of them, are counties that still have not gotten back up to the taxable value they were at before the recession. We're looking at this very issue with our fire millage, where we see that the tax base that pays for our fire services still is at its lowest point since 2000, or I'm sorry, the highest point was, it's still lower than it was in 2004, and it won't recover to its, the pre-recession number for another couple of years. And of course, that's expenses aren't doing that. Expenses keep on going. And so that's a difficulty issue. And then state shared revenue, or state revenue sharing, is another piece. And the other slide is a piece that the Citizens Research Council had put together of the way state revenue sharing is calculated. You can see that there's a baseline amount that's represented in the lower graph, the constitutional, that formula is set by Constitution. But the upper parts of that graph show the statutory, how it's calculated under statute. But there's been a significant portion of that that's not been funded over the years. And there's a number of reasons for that, and that's part of maybe what you can help us understand. But with these main two revenue streams kind of working against us, I know the state budget, looks pretty flatline from, isn't great, but it does look a little bit better than this, and this is definitely impacting us as we try to provide services. Can you share your perspective or what you're hearing from your colleagues and how we can move the ball on this a little bit more? Or?
I'm deferring to Representative Tice first.
I think it's important to note that the issues that you're talking about with respect to Prop A and Headley were ballot questions that were addressed by the residents of Michigan. So those were not positions that were put in place by the state legislature. Those are law that were put in place by our citizens that we then have to respond to. I do understand and agree with your position with respect to the revenue sharing. It's extremely difficult to continue to provide revenue, particularly given the additional difficulties of Prop A and Headley. What I would say is a whole lot of our townships, in particular in many of our cities, actually survived that economic downturn because of the padding that existed that would not otherwise have existed without those positions in place, because the taxable value and the actual value were so very different. So as the home values decreased, there was a pad there. There was a cushion before you actually saw revenue loss at the township level. And so this is the negative side as we're coming back up, but that was the positive side going down. We didn't have anywhere near the number of bankruptcies that we otherwise would have had as most municipalities do, had they been spending most of what they took in. So I will defer to Senator Hune with respect to the history and what he sees as how our current governor is approaching this, and perhaps you have more insight as to where the appropriations perspectives are.
And if I may, an important nuance to that, what you just said there is when Proposal A was passed in the early 90s, if most of your community was built at that time, you got the full benefit of that. But for a community like Hartland's, where there's a lot of new construction, where that gap, that cushion didn't really exist, it was much closer, it hit us a little bit harder. But you're right, it does work on the other side a little bit more to the benefit of older communities.
Yeah. Well, on that point, I mean, I think that's one of the concerns. I think that it perhaps, and maybe this is a question that will be part of your discussion. Several years ago, I think Governor Engler undertook a Headley Blue Ribbon commission and to look at Headley and the impact of Headley. Is there anything on the out there that where their current governor or where another commission is going to look at these issues, that the effect of Prop A and Headley, and how the impact of how those two constitutional issues, how they've really affected, because every report we have shows that local government is, the idea behind, dealing with infrastructure issues that we have, issues with pension liabilities. we don't have necessarily those, but I know other communities certainly have those unfunded or underfunded liabilities associated with health care and everything else, and pensions. And it just seems to me that we need to really take a comprehensive look at our tax structure here in a much more comprehensive way, in which all our local governments are funded, how the state's funded, how the schools are funded. I mean, we've kind of flip-flopped the way the school's funded with Prop A. It used to be that the local government paid 2/3 and the state paid 1/3. Now it's the other way around. And yet, you know, all we hear about is how underfunded the schools are. I mean, we see that everywhere. It's not just, and then there's certain school districts that seem to do very well for whatever reason. So I'm curious, is there some sort of movement to kind of study these issues regarding tax and how local government, because we're doing okay. I mean, I think we do fine, but we don't know what the next downturn is going to be like. We took the initiative when the downturn happened here in Hartland, and we had outstanding debt service for our water and sewer systems, mainly our sewer systems, where we had projected development going on, and we funded a study and actuaries and people to look at to figure out how we were going to make sure we were never going to renege on or not fail to pay a bond payment and not have to rely on the full faith and credit of the county. We looked at that, and we were fortunate. We had some good things that happened in Hartland at the right before the downturn. In particular, you know, the two developments we have at 2359. But at the end of the day, you know, we were fortunate to be able to look at that and study that issue and take control of it, which I just think that there's this whole tax policy that needs to be looked at. I truly think, and maybe I'm sounding too much like a politician, but I think we need to look at whether or not, and this probably takes a ballot question as well, why are we assessing property every year? Why not look at doing assessments every 3 or 4 years and having it static for those 4 years, except where you have improvements or you might have removal of property. Then you have something to go on, because when the downturn happened and people lost value, of course, what happened there was everybody came in to get their assessed valuation changed and their taxable value changed, and some of them were legitimate and some of them weren't, but nothing was selling either. So much of the data that was relied upon by assessors, there wasn't any data. It just wasn't there. And so I think we need to re-examine this, and I think we need a commission to study this and how we deal with assessing property in the first place. There are other states that do this, by the way. They don't assess property every year. Of course, and by doing that, you could allow government, local government, to plan their budgets on 3-year rolling average versus every year trying to figure out, you know, where they're going to be. They would know what their tax revenue is going to be. They could make those choices on a much longer, going forward on a longer period of time. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. So,
I'm sorry. What was the question?
Well, the question, that's okay. I probably made you fall asleep a little bit. But my point is there anything in the works to really study this whole issue? Comprehensively, because here's an anecdote. Someone told me that over in Europe, you got something like, I don't know, 45% tax, and everyone goes, wow, that's crazy. And I said, well, wait a minute. I pay property taxes, I pay gas taxes, I pay sales taxes, I pay income taxes, I pay Social Security tax, and I'm pretty much I'm pretty much probably at about 45 to 50% of what I pay in taxes in some way or another when you add everything up. But I don't feel like I'm getting all the services that I get for those taxes. But sure. That's another argument for another day. So my question is where are we at? I mean, we really need to look at this tax issue in a much comprehensive.
There is no blue ribbon commission. There is no overall committed effort to take a comprehensive look at our taxation in Michigan. You may or may not have liked it, but we addressed personal property tax a few years back, the Michigan business tax early on in my tenure in the Senate, which was the most ridiculous tax on earth. And those took an exorbitant amount of muscle and effort to get through. And of course, when you talk about property tax, you've got the constitutional provisions. So it's going to take some years and some effort to really take a look at, like you said, a comprehensive approach. And what's the best approach to not overtaxing our people and providing appropriate government service. And of course, there's always discussion of what's appropriate. But as far as the revenue sharing, you can certainly, local governments obviously should be thankful that we have a constitutional revenue sharing built into the Constitution. So us in the legislature can't get into that lockbox, and I hate to use that term. But does Hartland Township qualify for any statutory?
Yes.
Oh.
Because we're one of the 100 largest townships. We were,
okay.
A few years ago, post-EVIP, we were added.
Okay.
So we get a significant amount from that.
I remember this discussion a few years back.
Yeah.
And the constitutional revenue sharing's up about 2.6%. And I'll be frank and tell you, I don't anticipate that with our budget projections in the years to come to see significant increases outside of probably that inflationary, roughly inflationary number. Constitutional revenue sharing is going to probably stay within the inflationary ballpark in the time to come. That's just reality. Early in my tenure in the Senate, we passed some reforms to help local governments and school districts control healthcare costs. Probably didn't impact you. We did pension reforms with state government and school districts. Those were all the tools that we tried to help provide. And of course, early on, under Governor Snyder, we did some budgeting. Some called them gimmicks, some called them tools, others called them terrible things. Providing some carrots, others called them sticks, in terms of revenue sharing. You have to do this in order to receive your revenue sharing. And that has largely gone away because we've received so much resistance from local governments, and probably rightfully so, because you folks are the ones closest to the people and can make those decisions ultimately better than us in Lansing. But I guess to get back to your point, Joe, there is no Blue Ribbon Committee, there is no concerted effort to take a look at the overall tax structure. We all pick our favorite tax to hate, and we throw darts at it, all of us as candidates. But obviously we have an election coming up, and I'm not pitching either person, either candidates at the top of the ticket, but elections have consequences. And take a look at the candidates and see, particularly in the governor's race, because it's going to take that leadership from the executive office, see which candidate is talking about taxation issues. So yeah, and I don't mean to deflect, but my crystal ball, I predict you'll see, like I said, inflationary increases in revenue, constitutional revenue sharing, and we have some significant budget pressures in the time to come. Medicaid expansion was probably one of the worst policies, was the worst budgetary policy that I saw in my tenure in the legislature, and it's going, the cost curve is straight up. With that Medicaid expansion, that's going to create significant strains on our budget in the time to come. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, schools are hollering for more money as well. And we always, it's a fine balance, balancing the hollers and the cries for more money and not raising taxes on our people. So with that, I pass it over to Representative Opel.
I think one of the things when we talk about taxes, when we talk about what everybody gets, is the question of what is enough. And I would ask you, revenue sharing wise, what is enough? I ask the school people when they come in, because we have increased every year, at least since I've been in the legislature, we've increased what we give, but not what the state gives, but not much. The tax policy, I think you have an excellent thought on a commission to look at all of it. When you start looking at it, some of it's federal, but we really can't do much about in the state. Some of it is constitutional, some is statutory, and if you look, every state has a different way of taxing, and almost every state has similar issues. The complaints are the same. Not enough for education. We look at other states and say, wow, they're doing great. They're giving a lot of stuff. They look at us and say, well, look at the money that they give. So it's incredibly complex, and it would take a large overview to look at things, and then changing things, especially the constitutional things, would be difficult, and everything seems to be going up. So that's but to answer your question, there isn't, but I think it's an excellent idea.
Clarify, when you talk about the 4-year, are you talking about a 4-year smoothing, so some of the properties would be assessed but not all, and like
Yes.
25% a year over
Yes.
4 years?
Exactly. The idea would be to kind of look at how, you know, if you're a property owner, you know that your assessment is going to, of course, again, this is going to require a ballot, but it would take into consideration changes in the overall economy that takes place as well. When we saw the downturn, you saw all kinds of property values dropping. There was no data really for the assessor to really properly assess. I mean, we had 2 board of reviews, and probably not unlike a lot of other communities during that period of time, you know. And I mean, I served on a board of review, and I think at least every citizen should try and serve on a board of review in their community, because I think you really get an eye opener for what goes on in you know, with regard to these issues. But I see I see our economy kind of like what the climate is. It's going up in these volatile situations. I really am fearful that we're going to see another major downturn in the next, maybe not this year, maybe not next year. But what is that next bubble going to be, and what's it going to look like for, you know, our folks? And I think we should learn our lessons from what we've seen and figure out how that we can sort of protect our investments too. So anyway, that's just one thought. It's something I've thought about for many years. I think I have a white paper somewhere along the line where I've looked at this issue, because I've dealt with tax issues and over the years, and I just think that it's something that we may want to that at least should be entertained or looked at. And that's the purpose of, when I hear people talk about Hadley and talk about Prop A, you know, when local government, it's like, well, you know, we had to deal with Hadley, now we got to deal with Prop A. It was almost like a double whammy when it came to dealing with your, you know, taxes, but and assessments on property. So anyway, that's. We kept you here probably way too long.
I would like to commend you for addressing your unfunded liabilities and taking a look at that and actually having it be an issue. We deal with a lot of communities that are coming to us asking for different legislation in order to deal with decisions that they've made on their own that we had no control over, but then they have expectations that the state overall, which means your residents, will end up having to pay for decisions that they've made that they couldn't fund. So well done in doing that. It makes it a lot easier to deal with the economic downturn when you don't have huge bills that you have to pay that you were unprepared to take on. And I understand that particularly with the utilities in Livingston County, we had a lot of major issues, and we've all had to do a lot of catch up as the time has gone on from the economic downturn. So commending to you.
Just do want to thank you for your time. Been very gracious with that. Thank you for the dialogue. Thank you for listening tonight and over the years, and hopefully you'll pick up the phone next time I call too.
Okay, on behalf of our entire community and our board, thank you for taking your precious time and allowing us to have a nice dialogue. And the best to you, Joe.
Thank you.
Whatever you're doing next, I'm sure it'll be exciting.
Thank you.
And Representative Appel.
One other
go ahead.
question. How are the camels?
I got to get home to see him. I got to tuck him in. Tuck my 3-year-old in tonight.
we all appreciate your service
Yes.
to our community and to Livingston County in particular and the state as well. So thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, of course. And have a safe trip. Now, if you want to listen to our next topic, might be of interest to you, because it kind of tie bars right into something we already talked about tonight.
We didn't do this on purpose.
Maybe next time when you come back, we can talk about the road situation.
That didn't even come up yet. We're out of here.
Surprise.
Again, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay, next on our agenda is tribunal appraisal. And I believe we're going to have Mr. Heslop here this evening, or?
Well, he's certainly here to listen, but if you have questions, he can answer. But yeah, as it turns out, we have a big box at a tribunal, and they're arguing for rates, for values that, are unfair, and we've selectively kind of taken these positions, and I think it's been to our advantage to do these, that we dig in and we do an appraisal on this one. Anything you would add to that?
I think most of the information has been provided in the packet. I think the document that tells the big story is what I refer to as the tribunal tracker. It lays out potentially what we can lose if they win their side. The cost of the appraisal in doing this is basically our 2-year loss. It's the document here we're referring to. You can see the 2-year loss for all tax authorities across the township is in excess of $100,000. The schools themselves is $80,000. I mean, just the township's portion itself for our road millage or the township and the fire is a little over $9,700 for the 2 years. I think all the documents.
This is just the one store?
This is just the one store.
It's just that one store. You compound that, and this is the issue with the dark store, is that if this doesn't get under control, more and more tribunals and arguments are going to try to force all of them down, and this just multiplies. And as we spoke before, that's why that $2,000 contribution in light of tens of thousands of dollars a year and impact are important. But you have the proposal there for the appraisal. It's a qualified firm, and it's well on par with other appraisals that this board has approved before. I offer that for your consideration.
All right, so I just got to find it in here. You're looking for a motion to approve the, I'm trying to think of the name of the company real quick.
It's on the screen.
Is that Fromm and Widmer?
Fromm and Widmer.
I'm sorry.
I'll move to approve the appraisal agreement with Fromm and Widmer and the budget amendment for $10,000.
Support.
Motion by trustee Kalani, second by trustee Harper. Is there any discussion or questions?
Yeah, I have some questions.
Go ahead.
It's, you're approving this for $10,000, but it's really an open end. Because it says here that he could go an additional at $200 an hour if he has to testify.
Correct.
This is the
If
appraisal.
it exceeds the $10,000.
Yeah,
Well, I think they'll have to come back again
Right.
at that point.
I
Sometimes we
didn't
need
see
to.
that. I didn't see that in here where it has to come back to us.
It's a fair point, and I think it's been the case every time we've come here before. I think what you'll see, in fact, we've only had one property ever where it went to a tribunal and we had to have an appraiser testify. Otherwise, the fact that we get an appraisal actually causes the issue to be settled fairly quickly, soon thereafter.
Yeah.
But like any big legal case, if there's going to be much more expenditure, because we're going to have legal expenses as well, we would be coming to you, briefing you on the case. You would be approving, to spend significant dollars on the attorney and the appraiser to go further than this step. So this is kind of a next phase with more decisions to come if it continues.
Did any of these appraisers that you got the bids from, were any of them Livingston County appraisers?
They are not.
Did you know if Gerald Alcock from Ann Arbor was on that list?
He is not.
Did you know that CBRE was on that list?
That is who the petitioner is using.
The reason I ask that is because
I think a Livingston County, or someone that does a lot of business in Livingston County, would know the values better than somebody outside the county. I know we do that with the bank quite a bit. But that's just one point that I wanted to make. Because I think what is being done, being put in front of the board here is that the fear of other big boxes having a trickle-down effect.
That's true.
And I'm not so sure that that would happen, because Target was a new build, Myers was a new build, Imagine Theater's a new build, and they can't compare that to a distressed sale from that Real King had purchased that building from, a distressed sale from Walmart. Two different, totally different things. So I'm not so sure there would be a trickle-down effect. Just wanted to make that point. I see a lot of appraisals every day, and I have never seen one this much money.
To be fair, some of these...
Now, I know that it may be a little bit more complex.
It's a little more complex for a tax case.
But I don't know if
than
it's
for
double the cost of what I've seen as the highest appraisal.
I will tell you, and my previous life, I used to do real estate tax contesting on behalf of property owners, and this is $10,000 is probably far less than what the property owners paying for their appraiser.
I just don't.
And number two, usually, and I don't know the answer to this, but the appraiser for the tax trip that we're handling is used to testifying in court. Most of the appraisers that you deal with who are dealing with valuations of property, they're not trained to be to testify in court.
Oh, they do all the time.
Not like
these are big firms. I
know CBRE. I know very well CBRE. What I'm saying is that these appraisers that are dealing with the tax tribunals are those that deal with tax issues like this, are typically the ones that are going to have to testify in court. They're expert witnesses that know how to respond to the tax tribunal. That's just my point on it. It's a little bit different kind of way in which you present a case than you would if I were to have an appraisal done on my business for a banking business, for banking purposes.
If I may piggyback on, there is a degrees of complexity to it above having to testify in court for an estate issue or divorce or something.
I understand that, but I also know that they see a municipality paying for this, and a lot of times they look at municipalities that have deep pockets. And you know, I just want to be fair.
We've got multiple quotes on this, and
you got 3 from outside the county, so I don't know.
And I think probably the most important part that we haven't got to yet is that this is dealing with a fairly complex issue in dark stores. In that we're having now, because our hand is forced, to make these arguments at tribunal of attacking this from these different valuation methodologies that the state Supreme Court said back to the tribunal, this is how you're going to look at this Escanaba case. So now we have to go and do the same thing. And so it was even important, even amongst these 3 firms, not all of them were responsive to our need to have them do their appraisal based on the methodologies that was just dictated by the state Supreme Court, which offers more layer of complexity. So the firms locally don't have experience doing that on these big box dark store issues using those methodologies. And these are the firms. There's very few firms statewide that are prepared to do what the Supreme Court recently said that's how you're going to do it.
So in the report, it said that we had offered them like $36 a square foot or something like that.
That's correct.
What are they asking for?
About 23.
23?
Yes.
And there is a trickle down or domino, whatever you'd like to say. I mean, the appraisals that you've approved over the years are for the Targets and Kroger and the bigger ones. And we see the effect of when, you know, even when we stipulate on one without going to a full appraisal, they're paying attention. They know what's happening, and those discussions are next of me too. And so we have to kind of hold the line on some of these, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to do.
That, if I may, that trickle-down effect, it does occur because I have to be fair and equitable to all taxpayers. If one entity gets a number at $23 a square foot, I have to treat all of those the same. I can't treat one differently than the other. So the trickle-down effect is what he's referring to. During the initial downturn, we went through this process and actually had a call from Walmart during the Myers tribunal, and they said they would not go to tribunal, but they expected to be treated the same after the Meyer tribunal. Something else to make you, there is only so many appraisers willing to take these type of properties on because of what's going on within the state, within the region, is going across the country now. But during the process of reaching out to appraisers and trying to get bids, proposals for these appraisals, I was directed to a couple of appraisals that had been done for the tribunal and are sitting on the docket waiting for hearings just before ours. I'm fairly confident, based on those appraisals, reading them on the petitioner side and on the respondent side, I'm very confident with our number that we are being very reasonable with these type of buildings.
I think you are too.
All right. Thank you.
I mean, you're below, I mean, typically the big box stores they look sort of similar to a warehouse, really.
They are. They're exactly a warehouse, there's no doubt.
The Imagine Theater is a totally different kind of animal because of the complexity of the building itself. But you're looking at big box stores are like industrial and the industrial warehouses, and those are $50 to $75 a square foot. Sometimes you get into 100 if they're really, really good.
Sure. But
not many there. So, I mean, I think that at $37 or $36 a square foot, you're very reasonable. And I don't think some of the banks would appreciate a $23 square foot ruling.
And we're already
on appraisals that they have out on some of these larger buildings.
We're already the lowest in the county. So we're trying to stop the bleeding here.
So I think I would support this based on what your communication and conversation was with these appraisers, and I understand the complexity of what Joe was saying of this and the tax issue, but I just wanted to get some clarification of that, and I think the public should know that too.
I agree.
Other questions?
I support the recommendation for Fromm and Widmer. It appears that he's got the most credibility with prior big box testimony in the past, and the price is actually not the highest one we received. And certainly they were also answered the call, if you will, in terms of our scope of work. The question I have is not in regards to the matter before us, but I would like, while you're here, a quick explanation on why we are the lowest in the county, since some of the other municipalities, local municipalities are in some cases almost double what we are. So how did we get where we are, and why aren't we higher?
Basically, again, goes all the way back to the downturn when we, all three of our big box were reduced at a point in time. From that point in time, I can only increase the values of these properties at a rate that not only what's being perceived in the marketplace, but also there's some direction through the county. We have to be at 50% for all the different classes of property. Therefore, in essence, I am limited to how much I can increase properties in general. In this case, it would be the commercial class.
So you're saying that other municipalities that have much higher rates than we do is because those buildings are worth more?
They may have not gotten beaten up as much during the last downturn as we did.
Okay.
And we have the owner of that facility who have told several people up here and people within the township that when he saw the price of that store, when he bought it, he couldn't walk away from that.
That's right.
I mean, many people in this community had that said directly to them from the owner of that Rural King. So, I mean, he stole that property, and if he's basing it off of that, I think it's wrong. And I think that we have a pretty good case.
I think we have a very
attorney, but I would think we would have a pretty good case.
I'm very confident. I'm very confident, but I have to produce the document to prove it.
Other
The
comments or
complexity
questions?
of this is the fact that it's deed restricted. That's the big Escanaba Menards case.
If there's no other comments or questions, we have a motion and support. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heslop. We are on to board reports for our second meeting in August. Trustee Germain?
No report?
Trustee Harper?
No report.
Trustee Petrucci?
No report.
Clerk Shofu?
No report.
Treasurer Horning?
No report.
Trustee Kalani?
No report.
And I have nothing this evening. We will take a brief recess, and then we'll have some discussion on our water system, and then we will have our manager's report. Are we heading over there?
Oh, yeah? Oh, cool. Yeah, we have to see that. Oh, yeah. Michelle